Hey, I'm Anthony Losquadro from Intaction. Visit our website at intaction.org. Going to be on SiriusXM, the Karen Hunter Show, channel 126. And we're going to be talking about why foreskin is awesome and why cutting it off is not so awesome. And we're also going to talk about the 4 powers of foreskin: pleasure, protection, lubrication, and connection. Everybody wants it. You better tune in because I'm going to be there.
So I got completely confused. I thought we were going to have a doctor in the house, but what we actually have is an activist. So I'm going to do something that I've never done before, if I can figure this out. Hold on. Loree, talk, sing or something. Hold on.
I'm very excited about this conversation. No, because there was a little bit of playing around during the break, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
But I'm
he came in hot.
Yes.
So there was that.
Well, and then and then it's just the topic of what we're going to be discussing.
Right. Because
foreskin is an issue at the forefront of many folks'
now,
minds.
is it F-O-R-E? That's it? Foreskin?
Correct.
All right, because I'm doing it YouTube Live. I've never done this before.
Oh, okay, very cool.
I think that he should
Speak to the people.
Yes, hold on.
No, this is going to be interesting. We actually had an interesting debate about this when our son was born. Oh, I guess it wasn't really a debate. It was more of a question that I was raising because I felt like, this was in an era when I was really thinking a lot about bodily autonomy and wanting to make sure that we were respectful of the body. And then I would think about, we have this, and I mentioned before we actually went on the break, Americans have a lot of opinions about female genital mutilation and the idea about circumcising girls and using surgical procedures or some sort of cutting procedure to physically alter young girls' bodies. And for me, it always seemed it seemed hypocritical to have that concern and have those opinions about largely brown countries or countries populated with black and brown people, and not have at least an intelligent conversation about the mass circumcision that takes place on boy bodies here in this country. So that we're having this conversation, I think it's fascinating.
I do too.
Yeah. So yeah.
And Smiz, we need a doctor at some point, but I'm happy to talk to this guy. He is the founder and director of Intaction. Intaction? Let me welcome to the show. Let me get this camera set up correctly here. Let me welcome to the show Anthony Losquadro. Welcome.
Karen, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank
We're going to have
you.
a lot of fun today.
Thank you.
And we're going to learn some things.
I want to. So this is Loree Favors.
Hi,
She
how
is
are
a
you?
lawyer by trade, but a mom. She has a son. I was sharing my story about my brother when he was born. I'm sure he's embarrassed now. But tell us about why we are, as a nation, circumcision is considered healthier. It's considered to be, preferable. It's prettier. What's your take on this?
It goes back, it's an old story. And you have to realize 100 years ago, Americans were obsessed with stopping masturbation. So we had people like Dr. Kellogg's, who's the inventor of Kellogg's cornflakes. He was a celebrity doctor of his day, and he advocated for the circumcision of boys to remove the sensitive foreskin so they wouldn't masturbate so much, in theory, and they would be protected from all types of diseases and mental health issues. And the reasons they came up with were legion, and that's how America became somewhat obsessed about cutting boys' penises.
You think it was that? Because circumcision goes back, it's biblical, right? I mean, I read about, I used to be on a radio show with a rabbi, and, there was a story, I remember, it was like 15 years ago, about a moil, because, there's a whole big procedure, and it's a religious whole ceremony around the circumcision of Jewish babies.
Yeah.
And this particular moil used his mouth to remove the foreskin. And the babies were getting herpes, right? I remember this story like it was yesterday.
They were doing that to stop the bleeding.
Whatever. But it
Wasn't like they were biting it off.
No, they were literally this particular moil, and he got arrested for it. But the point I'm making is, in the Bible, 2,000-3,000 years ago, Jewish people, it was part of when Nazis came to power, they would make people pull down their pants to see if they were Jewish, because you can't really physically tell if somebody's Jewish. But because circumcision among Jewish people was part of their faith, it was very much, easy to define who's Jewish and who's not based on circumcision. So it's beyond just, don't you think?
Well, Karen, you're right in that it is a part of the covenant for people of the Jewish faith and for people of the Muslim faith. But you have to realize, in America, 98% of the circumcisions are done by doctors in hospitals. It's a cultural practice. It's not a religious practice for most people. When you say it goes back thousands of years, you have to realize it never went back thousands of years in most of the world. For instance, Europe has never practiced or embraced circumcision. It was really just a thing of people of Jewish and Muslim faith, with which are kind of in the minority. America, again, is done by doctors in hospitals principally, and it's in some ways it's a unique American practice.
So how'd you become a crusader, Mr. Losquadro?
There's a number of things. First, when I was a child, I went to Florence, Italy, and I looked at all these marvelous sculptures and statues of Michelangelo's David. And, from what I was told, this was supposed to represent perfection in the human body in terms of symmetry, and, this is the way the human body is. And they were all intact. And I could never quite reconcile why they were intact and we were cut.
Meaning that the
statues were
uncircumcised.
Correct.
Genitalia.
Intact is uncircumcised. You can't be uncircumcised.
That's a good point. Because by nature you are whole, and circumcision removes a portion.
Right.
That's a
you
really
can't
good
undo
reframing.
it for the most part. So
I like that.
So so it's intact. So that was one thing. I said, why? There seemed to be a conflict here. And later on in life, I was in the military, and some of my buddies were born not in the United States, and they were intact. And again, there was this thing: why were some guys intact, and why were some guys, American guys, why were we cut? And then later on, I started to see the pressure from the medical community that they were pushing this, and specifically like the American Academy of Pediatrics, they issued a policy statement, which has since expired, but at the time, they said that policy statement that it should be a parental choice and insurance companies should pay for it. Insurance companies should pay for it. And I started to see this was a money issue for the medical industry, if I could use that term. It was about insurance reimbursements, and I said to myself, somebody has to do something about this. People need information, babies need a voice, and that's how I became involved with this.
866-801-8255. We are going to get a medical professional in to talk about this, but I think maybe we should start having this conversation. If people are intact, see, we got to...
Right, it's a whole frame. It's a complete reframing of the... Yeah.
All right. Or if you're... So what's the going thought? Because we've been conditioned to think that being intact is nasty. Smegma, I used to, when I was in high school, I used to use that as an insult a lot, because I was that kid. When I learned what smegma was...
You were a bully?
Yeah, a little bit. Which is why y'all can get this smoking out. I'm real good at it. Not for real. But yeah, when I learned the word, I was like, oh, this is a great insult. So, and then I would force people to have to look it up, because most people didn't know what smegma was. Yeah. So I was really happy to be able to tell someone, you look like smegma and you smell like it. But that was, how we were conditioned, right? That this was a bad thing. But now that we know more, I don't know medically whether it's better or not better. I know that there are some religious practices around it. But I don't want to get too personal with you, Anthony Losquadro.
You can ask me anything.
Okay. So are you intact?
I am cut.
Okay. And do you want to reverse that?
Well, not so much reverse it. I wish I would have been left alone. I wish I would have been as nature intended my body.
Do you have children?
I do. I
have
a son. He's intact.
And how does he feel about that?
Well, he's 4 years old, but he seems to be very happy.
I think he's going to be mad at you when he grows up and everyone's like, what is that?
Well, it depends on the cultural shifts. It sounds like you're really embarking on shifting the way we even think about this.
You've got to realize, even as far back as 2012, which is the last data, 56% of the boys, the circumcision rate is 56%. So
that's it?
It's that
That's
low.
it, nationwide. On a nationwide basis. Like West Coast is so low, the majority of babies in the West Coast are intact.
Really?
And that number is declining 1 or 2% per year. So we're getting close to the tipping point, the 50-50 mark, where circumcised babies are going to be in the minority. If you look at babies in New York City, you're going to find most of them are probably going to be intact, because of the immigration and people from other countries where they don't practice this. And unless the doctors kind of put one over on them in the hospital and kind of make them feel like they have to do it, the baby's going to probably stay intact.
What about the
She's
porn
making
industry?
faces.
Well, again, I have to always battle my brainwashing, right? And, culturally and in other ways, you're raised to think this is not clean and this is clean. But I'm like rethinking everything, and I'm here for it. I'm open to it. So I think this is a good crusade that you're on, because it's definitely a crusade. And we're talking with Anthony Losquadro, who's the founder and director of Intaction, which is a movement, I guess. Can I call it that?
It is a movement. And it's bigger than my organization. There's many organizations out there that are doing things in their own style, in their own fashion, to raise awareness on this. There are thousands of what we call intactivists. We're intact activists.
We got that. We're really super smart here. Oh my God! All right. So, how did you get involved in this crusade? Was it when you had your son?
No, like I was saying, in 2012, when the AAP started promoting, pushing the issue, because they flip-flopped on the issue 6 times since the 70s. First, they told parents, you should do it, then they said, it's not necessary, then they said, you should do it, and then they said, it's not necessary, and then 2012, they said, you should do it again. And that really crystallized the movement of activists.
But you didn't have to go start an organization and start this whole, you didn't have to do that. You could have just been like, I'm not going to do this when I have a son. What got you off your couch?
I just thought that I had some talents that I could apply to this, that I could make a difference. But I've been doing. I've been the director of Intaction for over 10 years. I've spoken at conferences. I've attended lectures around the world. You can bring in a doctor, and I'll go toe to toe with him on any of this. I love to stump doctors on the terminology.
How do you stump them?
Ask them the 5 anatomical structures of the foreskin. They can't name it because they weren't taught it in medical school.
So what are they?
You've got the ridge band. You've got the frenula delta. You've got the inner skin. There's all these parts. You got the dartos fascia muscle, which is a muscle that expands and contracts to keep the head of the penis covered.
Wait, if you're saying that medical doctors are not familiar with this terminology, how are they then able to be effectively treating patients who come to them who are intact?
Because their medical training teaches them one thing. If there's a problem, cut it off. They're very great at doing circumcisions. They can put that clamp on, they can crush the foreskin, they can cut it off, they can give you pain management.
So delightfully horrible.
Especially as an adult.
Right.
Can you imagine, like babies, and I don't know what the trauma, because we had Dr. Stacy Patton here talking about the trauma of spanking.
Yeah.
And what it does and how the nerves and the buttocks and all that.
I remember that.
Oh my, and that was one of the things that made me go, okay.
Yeah.
This should never happen. But imagine a baby. The pain has to be just because
I don't have to imagine. Like so going back to this debate that we had, and I was still really trying to figure out where I sit on this. This is when I believe, I had a whole lot of beliefs about parenting before I became a parent, that I think every parent has that reality. So it was about 3 or 4 weeks after our son was born before we took him to a moil to have the procedure. So I wasn't under the euphoria.
You went to a moil?
Well, because we had him at a birth center, and so the birth center didn't do it. And, so we went to we live in a community where there's a lot of Jewish medical professionals. And so he was about a month old before we had the procedure. And so I was not in the euphoria of having just delivered a baby with this magical birth in a hot tub. Like, that was like 4 weeks ago. I'm like barely taking a shower and everything's awful, right? Because that's what happens 4 weeks into a baby. So we had to take him to the location where the procedure was done. And so I remember giving these people my child, and I remember the whimper in his voice when they handed him back to me, because they didn't let the parents go into the back. So as you're describing it, I'm like, I don't have to imagine what the poor baby's going on. I remember what he sounded like and the difference in his tone. So I'm intrigued by this, and I would love to, because if you're telling me that most medical doctors are not trained in this particular area, I'm thinking if I am an adult male who is intact and I'm going to a medical professional, I want to ensure that they do know those 5 terms, they do know those 5 portions of the body that are typically removed, and I want to make sure that they're effective at treating whatever issues I may have in that area. And now I'm concerned.
And I'm curious medically, because even, in the Jewish and Islamic faith, what is the reason for, because there's a spiritual, it's not, a lot of things in the Bible, like not eating
shellfish or something, right,
was done because you could die. So like
dirty animals.
Right, the 600 and something laws in the Old Testament were really to protect people, so they didn't have to think, well, these are forbidden by God. We just followed. What was the reasoning behind circumcision to start with?
There is, if you talk to people of the Jewish faith, they'll tell you that they do it because it was handed down to them from God.
There had to be a reason 3,000 years ago. Maybe people were doing intact men, are they more disease? You know, is there more disease passing because there's always
No,
this moistness and there's.
The ancient Greeks had no issue with foreskin.
They had issues
the Romans
with other things.
had no.
So did the Romans. They were nasty.
You know?
All right.
But I would say that if you are parenting a young child, a
Right.
young boy who's in school, who is intact, then I would be curious about what the teachers are being told
Right.
about how to properly clean
Right.
it, because I would imagine there is a different care regimen for that portion of the body if you have skin there versus if you don't.
Well,
you may have to.
here's the thing, and this is a big misconception, and it's really important. On a baby and a young child, you don't do anything to the foreskin. It's attached, it's fused. Okay, and it's not till the child gets older where it starts to separate and you could pull it back to clean it. If it's pulled back prematurely, that's called forcible retraction. It will result in scar tissue, which will cause problems later in life. So some people think, even medical professionals, nurses, care providers, they say, I've got to pull it back to see what, and then the kid screams, it may start bleeding.
It's so sensitive.
And,
right.
and that causes scar tissue, which then can lead to a condition called phimosis later in life, which is a non-retractable foreskin. So the key point is to leave it alone, just wash the outside, and that's all you need to do, because nature designed this thing to work
Just
fine,
like
just
just
the
like
way it
women
is.
don't need douches
Right.
because it's a self-cleaning unit, the vagina.
Yeah. But
Self-cleaning.
if you have a lobby that sells douche as a product and you want to
Right.
make money, then you must convince people that. They
and
need
vinegar's
that.
like the worst anyway. Oh my gosh, all of these things for marketing and for money. I agree with you, even though I'm not 100% on board with you, Mr. Anthony. Say your name again.
Losquadro.
Thank you, Losquadro. I don't want to be, because I just feel like, you know, did you have any desire to go to medical school to actually get the medical? Because I think the medical industry need people who are in there to challenge. I don't think enough people go to medical school to challenge all of the BS that they tell us.
You think you can get a used car salesman to stop selling cars? They make money doing this. It takes people like me and you and her and him to say, we're just not going to do this anymore. Because, you know what? Foreskin, nature intended our body to have it. It's there for a reason. It's in our DNA.
Right.
It's part of what makes us human.
Interesting. And I know, you know, before you got here, Loree was talking about female mutilation, which is very prevalent in some nations where they want to prevent women from having any pleasure whatsoever, which is so crazy to me. Like, wouldn't you want to have sex with someone that's enjoying it?
Unless your sex is tied to a patriarchal understanding of your power, then you don't.
You don't want her to have any fun?
Well, you don't care because.
Yeah, but how? I don't get that. What are y'all doing? It's so.
And if you've never had it, and the adults in your world don't tell you that that's possible, and you don't know that women can have pleasure, and you've been taught that this is a spiritual right that you must adhere to, why would I even question that? If I'm in a part of the world where this is accepted, if we're in a part of the world that accepts that as blandly as we accept that men in this country need to be circumcised, why would I question that?
Okay. Well, this has given us food for thought. We're going to continue a conversation after this. Thanks for being here today, Anthony Losquadro. You can follow him at Intaction1 on social media, and you can go to intaction.org. All right, sir. 866-801. Well, why am I giving out the number? All the lines are lit. We're gonna have a conversation when we come back. Let me take this YouTube thing.